Brian and Elaine Spitler's 20-year-old son Pat was fatally shot in the chest while they were away from home on the night of Saturday, December the 6th, 2014. Pat's death was heartbreaking and unexpected, but the case was particularly shocking because it was his 16-year-old brother Riley that had fired the shot that killed him. In the early going, investigators weren't sure if they were dealing with a spur-of-the-moment crime, a premeditated murder, or a tragic accident. However, the investigation took two surprising turns when they found out about the brothers' tumultuous relationship and how Riley got the gun in the first place. Before we begin, we would like to express our sincere condolences to the Spitler family for their loss. Pat and Riley Spitler, both born and raised in the city of Jackson, Michigan, approximately 80 miles or 130 kilometers west of Detroit. Despite having just 32,000 residents, Jackson has a significantly higher crime rate than many other small cities in Michigan or in other parts of the country. Even so, Patrick and Riley lived relatively normal childhoods, but their personalities couldn't have been more different. Riley was distant, moody, and introverted. Pat was personable, funny, and socially active. And as they aged, their lives went in entirely different directions. Riley hung out with a bad crowd, used drugs, and dropped out of high school in the 9th grade. He eventually got a job at McDonald's, but he made far more money selling drugs for his friend who was a dealer. Compared to Riley, Pat was a straight arrow. He had a solid work ethic, took his studies seriously, and enrolled at Jackson Community College after graduating high school. Pat worked at a local food service company and had another job at the Jackson YMCA, where he did everything from coaching youth sports to driving a bus. His boss at the YMCA said he was a reliable employee and that guests and other staff members were drawn to his positive, enthusiastic, and caring personality. Pat often put in 18 to 20-hour days, but he managed to find enough free time to attend church and hang out with his friends as well. Riley even admitted that he and his brother just didn't like one another.
Wasn't even like average siblings that, they fight and at the end of the day, they make up. No, just like straight up, we just didn't like each other. Yeah.
So, and it sounds like that's because he would, if I put it into my words, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like he kind of belittled you and talked down to you.
Yeah, a lot. Well, most
had to
of my
treat
life,
you like he knew everything and you didn't know squat for all intents and purposes. Is that?
Basically, yeah.
Okay.
He also claimed that Pat wasn't the angel that everyone thought he was, that he often bullied and belittled him at home and in front of kids in the neighborhood. Pat may have picked on Riley when they were kids, but he cared about his brother too. He didn't like that he dropped out of school, used drugs, or hung out with losers. He knew that Riley was smarter than he let on, which was why he found it so frustrating that his life was going in such a bad direction.
He thought that my life was going down drain, and if he's in this car, or if that type of stuff exists, he probably, would agree with you two gentlemen that I probably should be behind bars or whatever, but he told me to stop doing this shit a long time ago, and he disagreed with basically everything.
Pat regularly encouraged Riley to get his act together, but he had to tread lightly because he had a bad temper and he didn't like taking unsolicited advice. On one occasion, in the fall of 2015, they actually came to blows after Pat criticized Riley too harshly. Pat wrestled Riley to the ground after some pushing and a few errant punches, but this wasn't the first time they had gotten into an altercation.
He kept on talking about, I'm never going to make good choices. He's like, your life, you're just a loser, you're not going anywhere. And then I just got mad at him. I said, you're making me mad. And he's like, so do something about it. So I pushed him, and then he pushed me back, and then as soon as he did that, I punched him. Well, I didn't connect really well. I got him in the throat, and then he put me in the ground, basically just restrained me with all his force.
Okay.
And I was just could hardly breathe, and I tapped out.
About the same time, Riley allegedly pulled a gun on Pat during a similar encounter. It was unclear if Pat knew Riley had a gun in the house, but their father definitely did not know because he did not allow firearms in his home. But Riley's mother knew he had at least 3 handguns and a sizable stash of marijuana hidden in his bedroom. He told her he was holding it for one of his drug-dealing friends who had just been charged with a gun-related offense.
Did you show her the 380?
The 380, yeah, that's the one I'm talking about.
Okay, so your mom knew then if you showed her the revolver, and what, describe the revolver to me.
It's like a 6-shot.
Okay, what color is it?
Brown finish on the wood and black barrel.
Clearly, totally different looking gun than the other one, right? One's a revolver,
Yeah.
one's a semi-automatic,
Yeah,
right?
basically, yeah.
So you showed your mom both guns, though, it sounds like.
Yeah.
So she knew that you had more than one gun in the house, right?
Yeah.
And she knew that you
I
had...
told her that the revolver. That's what I told her.
But she knew you had it in the
Yeah, I
house.
told her that I was holding on to it for him so he doesn't get in trouble.
Okay.
Yeah.
And your mom also knew that you
She
had...
said get it out of the house as soon as possible.
Good enough for me. But your mom also knew that you had
She has
weed
the 3,
in the house.
yeah, the personal weed, for myself, yeah. I told her about that, yeah. She didn't know about, all the weed that was in that one bag, though, that you guys found.
Okay.
Whoever the hell found
But
it.
I'm just trying to do the math on this because it sounded to me like you were saying my mom had no idea there was drugs in the house, but now it sounds like you're saying my mom did know there was drugs in the house, and my mom also knew there were multiple guns in the house.
She knew that there was my weed, my personal weed, and then she knew that there was a revolver that I'd showed her when she gave it to me, and then she knew that I had 380.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Gotcha.
However, she chose not to tell her husband, call authorities, or punish her underage son. Instead, she told him to get rid of the guns and the drugs as soon as possible, which he never did. The truth was, 16-year-old Riley already knew how to control and manipulate his mother. She didn't like confrontation or tension in the home, and Riley threatened to run away if she told his father. Later, he even convinced her that he needed to have his handgun for self-defense because, as a drug dealer, he dealt with lots of shady and dangerous characters.
I'm sorry, you said what?
Where did you get the gun?
Where did I get the gun? To be precise, I'm not quite sure. Because
How about I remind you? You got it from along with the 45 and the 38.
I did the Taurus.
And then the weed that was in your belt.
That wasn't mine. I was holding on to it for him. But the gun, the 38, that revolver, and the other one, I don't know what it's called, was his. The Taurus was his.
Okay. So where did the 380 come from?
380 I got from another friend.
What other friend?
Well, I don't even know him too well. All I know is his name is and I linked up with him.
On November 26th of 2014, 10 days before the shooting, Riley and his mother drove to Dunham's Sports in Jackson. Riley picked out a compact and inexpensive .380 caliber Taurus semi-automatic pistol, and just a few minutes later, his mother bought it for him. Again, nobody told Brian Spitler that there was another gun in his house. Keeping him in the dark about the new gun wasn't particularly difficult because he worked 2 jobs and was rarely home. But Pat found out about it a few days later when Riley flashed it in the kitchen while he was eating a snack. A week later, Pat told his friend Dalton Dueck about it while they were jogging around the neighborhood. He said the gun made him nervous and that he thought Riley might eventually use it to hurt someone. Dalton asked Pat if he was concerned for his own safety. He said that he wasn't, but he also told Dalton that he was going to tell his father about it if Riley didn't get the gun out of the house in the next day or two. Elaine and Brian Spitler went out for the evening on the night of Saturday, December the 6th, 2014. Riley and Pat were home alone at the Stonegate Farms neighborhood in the Blackman Township. At that point, 16-year-old Riley only had the new pistol for about a week and a half. Later, he said he only fired it twice in the forested area behind the neighborhood.
gun before that night. I'd shot it once before. Well, twice.
Where'd you shoot it at?
Like in the very back of our neighborhood. One night I shot one round, the other night I shot another round.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we only have Riley's account of how things played out that night. He said he entered Pat's bedroom with the Taurus handgun sometime after 7 p.m. While Pat sat on his bed texting a friend, Riley said he removed the 6-round magazine from the gun's grip and replaced it multiple times. When Pat put his phone down, Riley showed him how quickly and efficiently he could reinsert the magazine and rack the slide to load a round into the chamber.
And I had the gun on me, too. When I went to go talk to him, I had the gun on me. And I was playing with it. I was trying to show him, how good my hands are, how good the cartilage of my hands are. So I see how fast I could cock it back, and I said, let's see how fast you can do it. And then he did it, fast or whatever.
With the round in the chamber, the gun was ready to fire. By then, Riley said Pat had grabbed an unloaded BB pistol and was pointing it at him and squeezing the trigger playfully. When Pat put the BB gun down, Riley said he racked the slide, ejecting the round from the chamber, removed the magazine, and handed the pistol to his brother.
Specifically in his room, where were you standing up?
I was standing up, he was sitting down, he was like on his phone or whatever, and I was standing up like on the foot of his bed.
Okay. And then what happened?
Well, he was on his phone, like I said, and we were talking. He had his CO2 little BB gun. He was pointing at me, and he was acting like he was James Bond or whatever, pulling the trigger like multiple times.
Pat gave the gun the once-over and then handed it back to Riley a few seconds later. Next, Riley said he inserted the magazine back into the gun, racked a round in the chamber, ejected the round, and then removed the magazine once again. Then he pointed the gun at his brother and asked if he thought it was his lucky day. We will never know if this amused or angered Pat, or whether he was indifferent to his little brother's dangerous and reckless behavior. Whatever the case, Riley apparently thought the chamber was empty because he had ejected the round just a second or two before. Then he squeezed the trigger, and when he did, a deafening crack shattered the calm. The bullet punched through Pat's chest and struck his heart. According to Riley, Pat said, "You shot me." When he realized what he had done, he had told his mortally wounded brother that he loved him and that he had to try to breathe as normally as he could. He also claimed that he held one hand over the gaping wound and dialed 911 with the other. During the call, he told the 911 operator that he had shot his brother and that they needed to hurry because he may have killed him. When the dispatcher asked Riley to describe what happened, he said they were playing with a gun and that he accidentally shot his brother. Next, Riley rushed through the house to meet the officers and paramedics out front, but the glass storm door was jammed and he had to shatter it with his fist. Officers from the Blackman-Leone Public Safety Department arrived at approximately 7:25 p.m. When they first saw Riley, he was shirtless, crying, standing in broken glass and covered with blood. He immediately told them that he had shot his brother and that he was probably already dead. Paramedics took Riley to an ambulance and treated his hand while officers and EMT went inside to check on Pat.
Into the cop car or whatever, the back of it, he said, "Sit right here," and then took me out. He took me to the ambulance. I was asking, is my brother okay? Is my brother okay? And he wouldn't say anything to me. He said, they're taking care of him, and I guess that was to make me, stay calm or whatever. But I knew it was the worst. What I was thinking.
Sadly, they could not detect a pulse and pronounced him dead at 8:05 p.m. Later, first responders lied and said they didn't know how Pat was when Riley repeatedly asked if he was dead or alive. Elaine and Brian Spitler had just turned onto their street when they were confronted with every parent's worst nightmare. Flashing lights, police, and emergency vehicle all in front of their home. Brian initially thought one of the boys may have left a kitchen burner on and started a fire. Riley was not arrested that night because officers thought the shooting was accidental. After all, he was distraught when they arrived on the scene, and he repeatedly claimed that he thought the gun was empty when he pointed it at his brother and pulled the trigger.
And I was you know, aiming it at him, you know, just joking around. I know how to decock it, you know, once it's loaded. So I loaded up, cocked it back, and when I thought I, you know, decocked it. And then I didn't realize that, you know, if the magazine's still in there, that it can still go off, because it will just reload another one. And I pulled the trigger, and I hit him right in the chest. He died about maybe 3 minutes after. And then I called 911 as soon as the shot went off. I was freaking out. I was screaming. I'm sure there's like a recording of the call if you ever wanted to, you know, go back to it. But it just all happened.
And you said you loaded it?
It was already loaded.
Do you know how many rounds were in it?
Yeah, I'd counted before. It was like 6.
Okay. And you went to decock it. When you say you went to decock it, how do you do that?
Well, I'd show it to you, but I would pull my left hand on like the handle, like the grip, and then take my right hand and pull back really hard on the slide. And it, you know, like the bullet would come out.
Okay, thank you for sharing that.
However, they began questioning his story when they recovered the Taurus and found the magazine was still in the grip. They then became more suspect when they found additional handguns and a fairly large amount of marijuana in Riley's room. Brian Spitler, their father, was understandably livid when he learned that his wife had bought their wayward 16-year-old son the very handgun he had used to shoot his older brother, Pat. Later, investigators began to suspect that the shooting wasn't accidental when they found out about Pat and Riley's contentious and often violent relationship. Facebook messages also revealed that Riley was planning on hanging out with prostitutes and selling some drugs later that night. This didn't have any bearing necessarily on Pat's death, but investigators thought it went a long way towards establishing Riley's character. Another inconsistency in his story was that he claimed Pat willingly handled the same gun and told Riley to get rid of it just a week or two before. Pat had even threatened to tell their father if he did not get the gun out of the house. This could have been a source of lingering tension between the two of them, but it seemed to contradict something that Riley had told officers shortly after the shooting.
You know, like the game Russian roulette? Like we would, you know, spin it and see what it's on, not actually pull the trigger, but just spin it to see if it lands on a bullet.
Wait a minute. We or you?
Like we, like him too.
He was doing this also?
Like I gave it to him because he wanted to check it out, so I gave him the revolver. He's like, "Whoa, is this real too?" And I'm just like, "Yeah."
Riley said that he, Pat, and a few friends had played a watered-down version of Russian roulette on at least one occasion, but they did not actually pull the trigger after spinning the old revolver's cylinder. Instead, they only looked to see if the chamber that ended up in position actually held a round. It's unclear if this claim was true, but Detective Chris Bolter and his colleagues didn't think Riley's version of events added up. Revolvers and semi-automatic pistols like the Taurus 380 are very different weapons, but Riley had experience with both. As such, investigators found it hard to believe that he thought the Taurus was empty on the night of Saturday, December the 6th.
You know that when you rack a bullet out, if the magazine is in, another bullet chambers, correct?
Yes.
You know that, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to talk not about what you thought, we're going to talk about what you know. So, you know that you rack one out, another one feeds in, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
When you found the gun, here's my question. My main question is, was the magazine all the way in or was it partially ejected? That's my question.
It's all the way in.
It's all the way in? Because I don't know, and I'm not even saying that I remember correctly if I had pressed the eject button or not, but if I had pressed the eject button at the time, maybe I thought, because like I said, if one went in the chamber, and after I decocked the gun, maybe I thought when I pressed the eject button that it would be okay. Maybe that's why I felt it was safe to pull the trigger. I don't know. He's dead now. I did pull the trigger. Those are the facts. But I don't know, man.
Well, the magazine's still in the gun when you racked the round out, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
According to them, it was a far more likely scenario that Riley went into Pat's room to impress him or perhaps even intimidate him into dropping the gun issue altogether. If so, Pat may have told Riley to get out of his room, threatened to tell their father, or insulted and belittled him in a way that caused him to lose his temper. Either way, they believed Pat and Riley had a disagreement. Riley knew the gun was loaded and that the shooting was intentional.
I think you feel really bad about what happened with your brother. I really do. All right? I want you to know that. I think that you feel really, really bad about what happened with your brother. Your brother isn't here. And I believe you that you love your brother. I believe despite all the disagreements, despite all the fights, despite every time you would get upset with him and you guys would fight when he would try to help you out, I believe that you feel bad about what's happened. But your brother isn't here. And your brother isn't here to tell about what happened that night.
No, this side of the story, I know, man.
Everything really points to me that if your brother was here, he would tell me that there was a disagreement that night.
I'm trying to tell you, man, there was no disagreement, man. I'm just trying to tell you, this is the God honest truth, man. There was no disagreement that night. I don't know what I could do to make you believe me, but when I say there was no disagreement, I really do mean. I'm not just trying to defend my case. I'm not trying to defend myself. When I say there was no disagreement, I wholeheartedly am trying to say there was no disagreement. There was no hostility that night at all.
Since Riley denied this, investigators told him that they would have to prove intent to get a murder conviction.
Mistaken on one thing, I'll have to prove that you intended to do anything.
Yeah, and I don't have and here's the thing, that's the hardest part. I don't have the proof to prove you wrong otherwise. So what's probably going to happen is I'm probably going to end up doing some type of time anyway for like fucking manslaughter or some shit like that. I guarantee that's what it's going to be.
A few days after the shooting, Riley was arrested and charged with open murder, felony firearm possession, and intent to deliver marijuana.
I really don't even know. I really don't even know. I really don't know what the fuck was going on in my mind. And I don't know if you believe me. I don't care if you believe me at this point. I did not have the intention to kill my big brother. My brother, I did not have the intention to kill him. I know that's what you're thinking.
With open murder, a judge or jury can convict the defendant on first or second-degree murder or manslaughter based on the particulars of the case. Because Riley was a minor, he was also questioned by employees of the Michigan Children's Protective Services. During one interview with Alexandria Fedowa, he calmly recounted the events leading up to his brother's death. But in a second interview with Becky Malin later on, he got angry and emotional and refused to discuss the matter any further. Jury selection began on Monday, January the 11th of 2016, nearly 2 years after Pat's death. With Judge John McBain presiding in the Jackson County Circuit Court, Assistant Prosecutor Jennifer Walker began by stating that the shooting was not an accident like Riley had claimed it was. Prosecutor Walker also painted a clear picture of how different the two boys were as children and young men. On one hand, Riley was a sullen and antisocial high school dropout who used and sold drugs and kept guns in the family home. On the other hand, Pat was a good student, a hard worker, and productive, and a well-liked member of the community. This glaringly negative opinion and portrayal of Riley was particularly hard for the parents to hear, even though they knew, and everyone knew, it was accurate. During his opening statement, Riley's defense attorney, Alfred Brandt, readily admitted that his client killed his brother Pat. There was no disputing that, but Mr. Brandt described the death as an awful tragedy. He also conceded that Riley was a troubled child who had a number of weapons and a large amount of marijuana in the home. In addition, he pointed out that Pat and Riley were the only two people in the home that night, and that the state would have to establish intent if they wanted a first or second-degree murder conviction. When Blackman Leone Township Public Safety Department Sergeant Steve Stowe took the stand on day 2, he said Riley was hysterical when officers arrived at the home on the night of Pat's death. This was a rare bright spot for the defense because, on the surface, it showed the jury that Riley had remorse and was not an emotionless teen killer. However, the jury got an entirely different view when images of drugs and weapons taken from Riley's room were shown alongside the photos of Pat's lifeless body. Riley turned his face to the side and sobbed when he was confronted with the pictures of his dead brother. At the end of a surprisingly short 5-day trial, the jury adjourned to decide which, if any, crimes Riley could be convicted of. If they returned with a first-degree murder conviction, he could spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole. But if they found him guilty of second-degree murder, he would eventually be eligible for parole. And last, he most likely serve a 15-year sentence if found guilty of manslaughter. The jury also had to consider the gun and drug charges, which together could carry an additional 6 years behind bars on top of or concurrent with any other sentence that was handed down. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury re-entered the emotionally charged courtroom. Riley and his tense parents looked on with guarded hope that the verdict would be read in their favor, but it was far worse than they had expected. The jury found Riley guilty of second-degree murder, possession of marijuana with the intent to distribute, and 2 counts of possessing a firearm during a felony. The Spitlers were understandably crushed, but it could have been worse if he had been convicted of first-degree murder. Riley's father, Brian, addressed the court and pled for leniency before the sentence was read aloud.
So, as I am here representing my family, it is my contention that the jury got the verdict wrong, based on the information that was presented by the prosecution. Now, the defense did not put up a defense. We understand that Riley has to be punished, that he acted in a reckless manner. I lost my other son. I get that. But I'm also his father, and I don't want to lose my second son. I don't want him incarcerated for a long period of time. None of my family does. Because, first of all, I do not believe incarcerating him for a long time is going to serve any other purpose than punishment and vengeance.
But despite his best efforts, the judge sentenced Riley to between 24 and 46 years in prison. He'd be eligible for parole after 20 years when he was nearly 40. But his parents struggled to contain their emotions in face of what they had just seen as an exceptionally hard and harsh sentence. Afterward, Brian Spitler verbally attacked the prosecution for seeking such a lengthy prison sentence, largely because Riley was a minor when he shot and killed his older brother Pat. Jackson County Assistant Prosecutor Steve Idema insensitively claimed that Brian was not speaking on behalf of his son Pat. Brian responded emotionally, saying that he was the only one in the courtroom who did represent Pat.
I'll stop the attacks.
He's not speaking on behalf of Patrick.
I am speaking on behalf of Patrick.
Right.
I'm the only one in this room who represents Patrick. He's my child.
Riley's attorney, Alfred Brandt, began preparing an appeal almost immediately after the trial, and after more than 2 years of legal wrangling, the conviction was finally overturned by the Michigan Court of Appeals. The court ruled that Judge McBain had improperly admitted testimony presented by 3 of Pat's friends. This meant the case might make it all the way to the Michigan Supreme Court, but the highest court of the state declined to review the case. That left Jackson County prosecutors with 2 choices. They could retry Riley or simply resentence him. Because the latter was far cheaper and less time-consuming, Jackson County Circuit Judge Thomas Wilson changed Riley's conviction from second-degree murder to manslaughter and reduced his sentence from 24 to 46 years to 4 to 15 years.
He's already been sentenced on the other 3 charges. I'm just sentencing him on the manslaughter. It's a sentence of the court. You'd be sentenced to Michigan Department of Corrections for a minimum of 4 years, a maximum of 15 years. 949 days credit.
Riley's lawyer, Alfred Brandt, always maintained that the shooting was an accident, but Judge Wilson said that he and the prosecutors agreed that there was far more to the story. Afterward, Riley said that he loves and misses Pat and that he thinks about him and that night every day.
I'll always love my brother. There'll never be a day where I don't miss him, where I don't think about him. I wake up every single day, look outside, I think about when I'm incarcerated for and I'm going to leave my mind. So I have to think about him every day. But not just because I'm incarcerated, but because I loved him, I always loved him. I've never changed up just a little day. I don't have a brother right now. I don't really have much of anybody.
A big shout out to Interrogation Files for providing us with raw footage for this case. If you want to check out the full interrogation footage, head over to their channel. If you found this case compelling, don't forget to like the video, comment down below and give us your take on it, and please subscribe to the channel. Also, hit the notification bell in order to stay up to date each time we reveal a new shocking case. Until next time, stay safe and keep your eyes peeled. You never know what's lurking in the shadows.